not manual labor at all. So.
Don't you have a seat?
No, I can't. If I sit, I'll fall asleep. So this is the part that I think is really helpful, because these are the touchstones to know how we're doing. You know, the fact of the matter is, in our last conversation, and this conversation we just had is an indication of that. Prayer, fasting, almsgiving, manual labor. How does that look in practice? How do they all go together? You know, there's almost an infinite possibility of ways of combining all those things. And you know, the temptation is to say, well, my way of balancing all of these things is the good way, and your way of balancing all these things is the bad way, right? I find this in Madison a lot. I identified myself at a meeting one time as a religious conservative, and I got an email from another chaplain commending me for my courage. I erased it before I sent it, but I emailed back, dude, I'm pretty certain I can beat up any 3 people in the room in a fair fight, and I don't fight fair. But then my wife, the attorney, said, not helpful. I understand. But you know, sometimes I'll find myself talking about why, as an Orthodox Christian, I don't think same-sex marriage should be legal, and I'm called homophobic. It's like, I don't hate anybody. I'm just telling you what my tradition says, and the implications for law. I'm not going out, but you know, what happens is someone says, well, there's only one single view of how to be right. And by the way, we do this in churches as well. You know, if there are churches where if you use a word of English, people just freak out. And then if you use any other language than English, people freak out. One time someone came to me, the deacon who was visiting did a litany at Vespers in Slavonic. And someone came up to me and said, I can't believe you let the deacon use Slavonic. You're going to destroy the faith of my children. Yeah, probably not. You know, so you get this. I mean, you know, this is why we need not just the directives, but some touchstones, something to latch on to see how we're doing. Now, for a lot of Orthodox Christians, objective morality gets a kind of a bad rap. And in fairness, people do use objective standards for morality as a way to sort of beat other people down or to promote themselves. But you know, the fact that people abuse moral norms doesn't mean that we shouldn't have them. You know, I mean, really and truly, people are just jerks. And all of us at one point or another are going to pick up some kind of stick and beat someone over the head with it. So, you know, when we talk about the virtues associated with the monastic vows, what we're really talking about is are ways to embody and express tangibly what in the church is called theosis, or deification. Eventually, I get everywhere, but this is really what we're talking about. The monastic vows of poverty, chastity, obedience, and stability really give us a hint of what it means to really be growing in to share in the divine life. In fact, Peter says in his epistle, first we share in the divine life. To share in the divine nature requires the acquisition of the virtues, and the virtues are cultivated within the life of the faithful by their repeated activity. In other words, God says, you're coming to share in my life, and now that you're sharing in my life, now that you're experiencing freedom, now that you're experiencing holiness, I expect you to start acquiring the habits and thoughts that make for moral and spiritual excellence. So when we talk about theosis and the virtues, what we're really talking, when we talk about the virtues of theosis, what we're talking about is putting deification into practice. Okay? You with me? So let's look at some virtues. Yay! Poverty. There's a monastic vow of poverty. St. John Climacus in the Ladder of Divine Set says that the covetous man will fight to death for a needle. I always like that picture of two dirty monks in ratty cassocks, you know, fighting over a pin. You know. And think about what that means, though. The covetous monk, the greedy man or woman, is always prone to conflict with others. This means that if I'm greedy, my relationship with other people will always be tense. Those relationships will lack warmth and support, and I'll be lonely and isolated and feel unloved. And constant conflict with other people will affect my ability to pray and to draw closer with God. The monastic vow of poverty reminds me that I need to simplify my life, not only materially, but emotionally and socially. I have to give up those things that distract me from God and undermine my ability to love my neighbor. I was talking to a group of college students, and I said at one point, friendship is a virtue and only the virtuous can be friends. And they said, what does that mean? I said, you got a drama queen in your life? Yeah. You can't be friends with that person. That person is unstable. You can help that person, but you can't be friends. It can't be a friendship because that person is just all over the map. What we need to do is to simplify our life, not only materially, but also emotionally and socially. A lot of times again, I'm seeing this on Facebook with the election. People are all over the map, left, right, in favor of the election, Trump's election, against Trump's election. And I keep wanting to say, y'all need to dial it back. You're making yourself crazy. I have people whose children are terrified that Trump is now president because mom and dad are just so angry at the outcome of the election, they can't help but terrorize their children. It's like, stop. We all know someone who is just, there's just drama that follows them, like the little clown around Pigpen in the Phoenix cartoon. So we need to have lives that are materially, emotionally, and socially simple, not complex. That doesn't mean, or shouldn't mean, that we live in destitution or that we live without friends. It just means that the things that I need not only for my physical life, but also I need to have the things I need to do what it is that God has asked me to do. Okay? Everyone, I'll tell the story. When we were newly married, we didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't have good cars. You know what the problem is of not having a good car?
You're always paying to repair the old one.
Exactly. There comes the great part in at least for us in marriage was being able to afford a car that did not need to get repaired all the time. Yeah. It's like suddenly there is a lot of freedom in that car, unless it's a Volvo. Because Volvos don't break down, but they are a lifestyle option. You have to take a Volvo to a Volvo dealer for everything.
And then you're going to pay.
It's like owning a VW. You own a VW, you go to the VW dealership. Really, if you're going to invest that much energy in an automobile, buy a Mercedes.
Is that part of the poverty discussion?
It is, because you should have what you need. I think bishops who travel a lot should not only have very good, stable, comfortable cars, I think they should have a subdeacon who's a driver. And the reason is because I'm a priest. And honestly, I do not need despota vladika sejedna. Driving halfway, 6 hours to a parish, getting in, being tired, and he's already on his, and then something happens and he snaps because he's tired. I don't want a tired, cranky bishop.
He's got more important things to do than drive.
Yes, take care of me. I need the bishop quiet. I need the bishop rested and recollected when he shows up. If that requires that he has a Cadillac and a driver, great, let's do that. Because, frankly, we're going to get more value out of the bishop. That's what poverty means. It's not a matter of doing without, but having what you need to do what it is that God has asked you to do. So, what we're looking for is the sign that we're being faithful to our vocation is that we are living a life of material, emotional, and spiritual simplicity and are then free to serve God and our neighbor. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Poverty to me means a humility too.
Well, yeah.
If you could have a lot of money, but if you're humble and you have a humility, it's like living in poverty basically with all that money.
Live simple.
Yeah, well, I've been poor.
So you could.
It's not like living in poverty with all that money. I assure you, it's not. But it is good to have humility and what we're looking at is simplicity. And hopefully simplicity will bear fruit in humility, but it may not necessarily. But what we're looking for is especially that emotional simplicity. So that will bear fruit in humility and social simplicity. Let's go to the next one, chastity. When we think about chastity, we think about sex and explicitly sexually abstinence and purity. And this is part of chastity, to be sure. But on a deeper level, chastity means that I refuse to exploit the weakness of others for my own advantage. In this sense, chastity is kind of related to, you might say, a wholesome sense of competition that we want to see in sports and business. Healthy competition doesn't exploit the other person. Rather, the other person's strengths or success are an invitation for me to excel, to develop more fully the talents and gifts that God has given me. This is always a problem with college students because they've grown up in such a sexually charged and unwholesome attitude. They assume that they need to be sexually active even though they don't want to be. So what happens is I tell the students, in this culture, you're both simultaneously predator and victim. You don't want to have sex, but you feel you must, so you give yourself over to someone, but it's coerced. But that other person also feels coerced. So pretty much, you're just hurting each other. Hey, let's just stop. Let's just not do it. Sexual immorality, like covetousness, undermines the collaboration that's essential to the life of the church. I remember one time, and it was a Christmas. I think I was still a deacon. We were at our godparents, Damon and Carol Helkes. Those of you know them in Pittsburgh. Yeah. But their oldest son, George, and I were talking. George and I had our arms around each other. And on the other side, I had my arm around his wife, Mary. And he had his arm around my wife, Mary. And his brother, Nick, now Father Nicholas, he had his head on my chest. And George and I were the only two talking. But there was this little puppy pile of people in our early 20s and 30s. And the only reason that works is because everybody knows who they can't have sex with. And that's a problem. So I end up recommending, for example, that college students watch romantic comedies from the 30s and 40s. Hey, you need to watch the Thin Man movies. Watch William Powell and Myrna Loy. Oh, they drink way too much, but they're smart, they're sexy, they're sassy. And you know what? She gives as good as she gets, and it's sort of a fun kind of collaborative relationship between these two if you haven't seen it. Or Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. You love Katharine Hepburn? All the emotions from A to B, as Dorothy Parker once said. Humphrey Bogart, Laurel and Lauren Bacall. Young people need to see these movies because they have forgotten they've forgotten how to flirt. They don't know how to flirt. They don't know how to express admiration without it being preparatory to possession.
They
which
don't
is
have
awful.
to talk to each other.
They
Use
don't.
texts.
But then there are all these young women who grow up thinking they're not attractive, they're only sex objects. And then there are all these young men who never really understand what it is to be a man and to be worthy of a woman. That's awful. Within the tradition of the church, chastity is the basis of the inner unity of the human personality, which will always be in a state of harmony between its mental and bodily powers. In other words, things like sin, like fornication and adultery, they just destroy this harmony and this integrity. And not only they damage the spiritual health, but they make true love impossible. And there's actually physiological evidence about this now, that sexual activity basically rewires the brain. it fosters bonding, and if you don't then act on that bonding in subsequent encounters, or if you go off to someone else, you break that part of your brain, I'm simplifying, that makes love possible. Poverty and chastity are the underlying virtues of simplicity and respect are two sides of the same coin. Taken together, they serve both to protect and foster our life together in society and the church. And without them, neither civil society nor the church can survive. If I'm always trying to acquire things, whether it's material possessions or relationships, I'm just predatory. But if I'm predatory, then no one's going to trust me. No one's going to feel comfortable around me. That's why we need to have that simplicity, and that's why we need simplicity and chastity. So, does that make sense? That respect for other people. Obedience. Again, St. John Climacus. Great is he who piously renounces possessions, but holy is he who renounces his own will. The one will receive 100-fold either in money or in graces. I do like that, You'll get money. But the other will inherit eternal life. The word obedience is from a Latin word that means to listen. So the obedient person, the obedient monk, is the one who listens prayerfully to God. And that's how we know we're growing in our vocation. That's how we know we're growing in holiness, that we are more inclined to listen to God, to be obedient to God. In a parish setting, obedience is often misunderstood. Sorry, Father. We do not owe obedience to our parish priest. Well, some people are not. What we do owe our parish priest is deference, by the way. And the reason we owe a parish priest deference is because if there's a problem and his phone and the bishop calls someone, it's Father Hans's phone that rings. That's why we defer to the priest, because he's the one who's responsible if there's a problem. But this is the same in marriage. What we owe is to each other is deference. We defer, we respect the role that people have in our lives, their wisdom and their knowledge, but ultimately, obedience is owed only to God. I defer to people all the time because they know stuff that I don't know. And sometimes I defer to people, even if I know more than they know, because they're the ones who have to bear the cost of the decision. So I'm never going to tell someone, this is how you need to feed your children during the Great Lent, because it's not my call. It's not my job. Without obedience, without prayerful attention to God and my willingness to form my life according to His will for me, I'm not able to rightly answer the questions of prudence that we saw earlier today. Obedience is key to discovering who I want to be at the end of my life and taking the steps I need to become that person. Because really the only one who knows who I'm supposed to be and how I'm supposed to get there is God. And this, by the way, is the same with a parish. And so many of our parishes, they're often very good liturgically. They're not very good in prayerful living. I have a friend, he's a Presbyterian minister. He has a very interesting technique he uses with his board of directors. He doesn't ask who's in favor, who's opposed. Whenever they have especially a major decision to make, he says, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to separate for 15 to 30 minutes. We're all going to go to different parts of the church. We're going to go with scripture. We're going to just sit quietly, and we're going to pray for 30 minutes. And then we're going to come back together. And the question is it God's will that we do X? You see the difference of that? I don't, it's not what do I want, but in my prayerful consideration, what does God want for us? This really transforms, I think, our conversations. And it's interesting, he says, And if at the end of that coming together and that asking, if we don't come to consensus, we don't act. We don't say yes, we don't say no, we just revisit it in another month. I think most of us would be happier in our lives if we ask not what do I want, but what does God want for me? What does God want for my husband, my wife, my children, my employees? Obedience is the sign that I'm taking my vocation as an Orthodox Christian seriously, and that my ascetical life is really beginning to shape my character. Finally, stability. The heart of obedience is discernment, a virtue that flows from humility. St. John Climacus says that for the beginner in the spiritual life, discernment takes the form of accurate self-knowledge, and time matures into a spiritual sense that faultlessly distinguishes what is truly good from what is of nature and opposed to it. In its fullness, discernment is a divinely revealed knowledge that can enlighten with its lamp what is dark in others. Or he just says more directly, discernment is and is recognized as the assured understanding of the divine will on all occasions, in all places, at all times, and is only found in purity of heart. That last line is important. Poverty, chastity, and obedience are all in the service of what I would call vocational fidelity, of being the man or woman that God has called me to be. Without going into particulars, I've been a priest for 20 years. Most of that has been miserable, to be perfectly honest. I've had just extraordinary times, but I've gone years where people were just really, not to put too fine a point on it, someone made a website to talk about how evil I was. Actually, 2 people. 3 people, I'm sorry, yes.
3 different websites, or 3 people got together and made
3
the website?
different websites.
Wow.
3 different websites. Unfortunately, one of those individuals was also a member of the Metropolitan Council of the Orthodox Church in America, where's the lawyer? Yeah, what happens when a board member slanders someone?
Does he get sued?
Could. What happens if the board member slanders someone and engages in interstate activity to perpetrate that slander?
Then he can get sued federally.
Criminal charges.
Yeah, it's a civil RICO suit. It's like, really? You people are, really? How bad could I be that you want to bankrupt the OCA just to get, to draw me through the mud? So it's been bad. But the fact of the matter is, the reason I keep doing this is because this is what God has called me to do. I have to be faithful to my vocation. And there is a blessing to that stability. Spiritual formation, to go back to something we discussed almost at the beginning, is concerned with helping people discern in light of the gospel who God has called them to be, and then how to be faithful to that calling in the midst of their everyday life. I trained to be a spiritual director. I am a very good spiritual director. But in order to be a spiritual director in the Orthodox Church, I had to learn what the problems are in the Orthodox Church. The only way to learn the problems is to experience them firsthand, which is another way of saying getting smacked around. Well, that stuff happens. But now I know what the problems are, and I am confident in that. When God called, God set me apart to be a husband and a priest, and He's called me to do this every single day, whether I feel like it or not. Even when the circumstances make that difficult or seemingly impossible. But this is what we have to do. All those stats on the board that you saw that are so overwhelming, those are all the reasons why it's impossible. It's all the reason why failure is assured. The reason that failure is not assured is because we're willing to be faithful to our vocation as Orthodox Christians. I'm going to leave you with this. The challenges that we face for the church in America really do, in the end, all come down to better spiritual formation for the laity and for the clergy. This requires coming into a right relationship of things in a world that both begins and ends in mystery. The problem is that in the modern world, actually in the world itself, the fallen world, we worship power and mastery and the promotion of power as an end in itself. And some of us justify that by appealing to God. The problem is, to do what it is that God wants us to do, we need to be willing not to renounce power, but to renounce the misuse of power. Not to renounce education, but the misuse of education. Not to renounce theology or our tradition, but all the different ways in which we misuse those things, those great gifts. But to do that requires a living sense of our own vocation that really comes from very good spiritual formation. Spiritual formation helps us discover who we are and how to put that into practice. Or to use language maybe more familiar to us as Orthodox Christians, if we exalt freedom of choice and neglect the work of spiritual formation, we're left with a life scarred by the passions and all that that implies for us personally and as the church here in America. And I think the reason we're suffering the way we are with our loss of faithful is because we really have let something else become our concern. We really are not concerned, whatever may be true here, we are not as a community concerned with the pursuit of holiness. We are not concerned with helping each other discern and live our vocation as disciples. We are very concerned with other things. And it doesn't really matter what those other things are, because they're not what God has called us to do. So really the challenge that we face is just to be who God has called us to be and to invest our resources in that. That doesn't mean that the church or the parish will grow numerically, but it will grow spiritually. And whether it grows numerically or not, it won't grow numerically unless it grows spiritually. And that's really what the numbers show. I can convince anyone to become Orthodox. I'm smart, I'm well educated, and I cheat. I said that to a room full of Campus Crusade for Christ students a couple of years ago. I can sell orthodoxy every single time. Not what we need are sins. And that really is, end of the day, the only challenge we have before us. Will we become saints? Will we grow in holiness? Or will we wait till God takes the church from us and gives it to someone else? So, that's all I got. It's been a delight. Anything else? No questions, trials, tribulations? Email address of my bishop so you can complain.
Any questions?
I've got,
Everybody sign us, and then I think we're ready to go, right?
yeah, there was a question posed that is generally unrelated to your talk. Could you talk a little bit about cremation?
Yeah, we don't do it. We don't. The body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. Cremate it. Roman Catholic Church allows for cremation, and what they discovered is that pastorally it's been a disaster, because what's happening is that I've been to Catholic funerals where, for example, the cremains are brought into the church instead of the body, so the body isn't blessed. What's blessed is an urn, and people aren't burying the cremains in consecrated soil. They're keeping them on the mantle. Or a little lot, or they're turning them into diamonds. There are reasons. I think I wouldn't say cremation is absolutely wrong morally, but the way it works out, it's
So it's the ramifications of cremation that we have an issue with?
What happens is, well, I mean, for example, cremation in case of the plague is one thing. You know, so it's not like for example, there's never a situation which is right to kill an innocent person. You know, but there are times when cremation might be necessitated because of circumstances. But those circumstances are very narrow, and in the main, cremation historically has been a sign of a rejection of the resurrection.
Of the materiality, it destroys the body.
Yeah, I mean,
But if you know how cremation works, everybody thinks you go in the oven and then you come out in ash. It's not like that at all. Cremation, you ought to come out partially burned, and then they take the remains and they put them through a grinder,
yeah,
right? It's a desecration of the body.
yeah.
It denies the relatives a place to go, right? Because dad or mom
Yeah.
are buried here. You know, third, fourth generations down, that's not as important.
Right.
But where's mom and dad? Well, they're in heaven. No, they're in their ashes in the CERN. Or they're buried here. I mean, it denies physicality. It denies the materiality of the body.
Historically.
Does it have an
We're-
effect on the
that's
soul
part
of
of
the
our being.
deceased?
Yes.
But also earth to earth, dust to dust.
You know,
Yeah,
if